I am Bill Brown, the Director of New Faith Expressions for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and my colleague, Reverend Rodney Smothers, who is the Director of Leadership and Congregational Development. We bring you Training Tuesdays, and this evening we're here for when the collection plate disappears, funding ministry in a virtual world. And let's start with a word of prayer, and I pray that I can keep my microphone straight tonight. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, you are gathering us together tonight as stewards of gifts that you have given to us. So we give you thanks for the blessing of the gifts that our churches receive and our opportunity to use them to spread the good news of Jesus Christ to our communities and around the world. So as we find ourselves in this unusual time where we are either not gathering in person or beginning to gather in outdoor worship, depending on our location, it is challenging to continue to receive funds so that we can be about your ministry. So we give you thanks for Reverend Williams and the knowledge he's going to share with us tonight, and ask that you would bless him as he prepares to lead us in this conversation. Bless all who are tuning in tonight, that we would be strengthened, that we would be given insight, wisdom, and understanding so that we could be your church in the name of Jesus. Amen. So tonight I am pleased to be joined again. He's been in some of our Training Tuesdays already by the Reverend Daryl Williams. He is the senior pastor of St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Oxon Hill, Maryland. He's also our conference statistician. Don't know how many of you knew that. I just found that out tonight, so that's excellent. And he is the vice chair of the Council on Finance and Administration. It's also safe to say, Daryl, you are somewhat of a stewardship expert. I know you've led a variety of workshops and webinars around stewardship, so I'm so glad you could join us tonight. Now, tonight's format is going to be participant-driven. I know Reverend Williams has some opening remarks to give us, but he really wants to be able to answer your questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, hopefully it's at the bottom of your screen. If it's not, someplace on your computer screen or your tablet or phone, you will find a box marked Q&A. And feel free to ask questions tonight. And Reverend Williams is going to try to get to as many, if not all of the questions that you ask. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll monitor the questions and begin to feed them to you after your opening remarks. So welcome, Reverend Williams.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. And good evening, everybody. I am excited that you all are joining us for what is Zoom number 1385 during this crisis, or during this month, depending on how often you have to do these. But I'm glad to be here. I am broadcasting from the space station, which is why you have a waterfall in the background. No, I'm in my basement, but listen, it's 7 o'clock at night. We've all had long days. And when you start talking about stewardship and money, people begin to drone over and their eyes roll back in their head. And I get that. So we want to make this fun, exciting, and interesting, or at least as interesting as we can while we're looking at computer screens. So I thank you all for your time. I want to help you, and I want you to get your questions answered. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing a few opening thoughts, and then really I need your questions. And I need your questions because all of us have been to seminars where as soon as we walked out, we said, I wish they had covered, or I wish I could email somebody. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you all my email address right now. It is rebdlw@gmail.com. If you have questions after this, or you just want to chat, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to answer, happy to respond. But what I want to do tonight, after I give my opening comments, is I need your questions, because I want to help you walk away with answers that you can put directly to work as quickly as possible. I want somebody to be able to walk out of here and tomorrow morning say, this is what we're going to do. So no matter how peculiar, particular, or direct to your context the question is, we will take questions and answer them this evening. So the title of this is, what do you do when the collection plate disappears? The truth of the matter is, we were vaguely at best prepared for what happened in March. You know, if we were in the Baltimore-Washington conference, you know, it was a Thursday evening when we got the instructions that we wouldn't be able to do in-person gatherings. And for many of us, that caught us flat-footed, that caught us off guard. And it caught us flat-footed and off guard because if you're a pastor, you had two questions. What am I going to do for Sunday? And how am I going to pay for all of this? And that is exactly what you should have been thinking at the time, because none of us were prepared for our collection plates to essentially disappear. And this is the thing. If you think about it, our collection plates disappeared, but this is really an opportunity for us to do a whole bunch of things that we've wanted to do for a long time. If we're honest, many of us have said we should do online giving, or we should encourage people to give digitally, or we should work on giving on our website or getting an app and all those sorts of things. And we wanted to work on them, but we had an SPRC meeting. We wanted to work on them, but we had an administrative council meeting. We wanted to work on them, but the boiler blew. We wanted to work on them, but we had to prepare for Sunday school. There was always a but that stopped us from moving forward. Now, we don't have a choice. Circumstances have moved us forward. So as circumstances move us forward, we have to move with them. And what I want to talk about tonight really is creating a culture of generosity in a digital world. You know, the plate has disappeared, so now we have to reimagine everything. No longer can we do the what ifs, we have to do the what will we do, because what will we do will define the strength of our churches in this time and the strength of our churches going forward. So what you really want to think about is, what is your culture of generosity like in your church? Not what do you want it to be, but what is it like already? When you think about culture, you have to remember that culture is essentially what we live in. It's the air around us. If we were fish in a fish tank, culture would be the water. We don't see it, we just live in it. It's kind of, what are the automatic things? We know certain automatics in life. You know, if you're driving your car and you pull up to a red light, if the light is red, you stop. If the light is green, you go. Nobody has to tell you that more than once. And if you see people often enough, you know that that's culturally the norm. So what is the cultural norm around generosity in your church? And for many of us, if we're going to be honest, listen, let me tell you this. My name is Daryl, and I'm your friend. I am going to say some things that might upset you slightly. Luckily, none of you know where I live, and you can't come outside anyway. So I feel good about you being over it by the time we see each other again. Your culture is what you have. And if we're honest, many of our churches didn't have generosity cultures. We had maintenance cultures. We had habit cultures. Now, maintenance cultures are very simple. We had a culture where people give to maintain the building. They give if there's something that comes up. We know that if the roof goes, then we can raise money for the roof, or we can raise money for the boiler, or we can maintain our ministry. Or we have habit cultures. People come to church, they give on Sunday, they go home. They come to church, they give on Sunday, they go home. All of that is great until the building goes away. When the building goes away, the question is, do you have a generosity culture, or do you have a culture that's tied to doing things? What we ultimately want is a generosity culture. A generosity culture moves us from giving to things, but giving because of and out of our faith and generous nature. We want to be generous people. I've never met anybody that said they wanted to be stingy. Now, I've met stingy people, but they've always never said they wanted to be stingy. They just were. We want to be generous people. Everybody wants to be a generous person, but we often say, well, how can I do that? Generosity is a heart issue. You have to remember, if you're going to have a culture of generosity in your church has to be generous in all ways. And that becomes, how do we live, work, and interact with each other to be generous? The Bible tells us, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Generosity ultimately is a heart issue. We are incredibly generous to things that we care about. All of us can say that we have money problems, but we know that if our child needed a surgery and we had to come up with $1,500 by the end of the week to save their lives, we'd figure out a way to do it because it means something to us. Or if it was our grandchild, or let's just be honest, if it was your dog. I love my dog. My dog is sitting next to me right now. When no one else in the house will talk to me, Rocky sits next to me and barks. So if something happens to Rocky, I will figure it out because Rocky has my heart, as does my family. And what we want is for Jesus, your church, and the mission and ministry of your church to have your heart so that you're generous in giving to it. Now, understand there's a difference between giving and paying. All too often, we've treated money in the church as a stewardship issue. Now, stewardship is wonderful, but stewardship is a management term. Generosity, by contrast, is not about management. It's about the heart. It's about getting people to want to give without an expectation of return. You see, when you give generously, you're essentially saying, I'm doing this because. Because what? Because I want to. When we give to pay for things, we're doing this because the boiler broke, or because the church has to stay open, or because the roof is leaking. We want to move from because of something to because of who I am. We want to establish in our churches cultures of generosity that allow people to give generously in all ways. Now, let's be clear. When we say in all ways, we often think of we want to give in our time, our talent, and our treasure. Now, if you're going to be generous in heart, time, talent, and treasure are not split from each other. You give of your time generously, of your talent generously, and of your treasure generously. What people have often tried to do is say, all right, time, talent, and treasure, how can I move the needles to get to a number where I give a lot of time, but maybe not a lot of treasure? Maybe some talent, a little treasure, but a whole bunch of time. No, it's giving generously of all that we have in all ways and at all times so that the ministry and mission of our church goes on and goes forward. This is where we want to be. Ultimately, we want to be in the place as churches where we are so generous to the church because our churches overflow into generosity in the community, so that the generosity that we share in the community has people ask this question: what would we do if that church left? This is what you want. If you ever had to put out a press release that said, our church is going to be closing or our church is going to be moving, you want to be such a generous church by culture that people come banging on the church door saying, you can't leave. What are we supposed to do without you? And the only way for that to happen in the community is for it to start in the church. Generosity starts within the building before it moves outside of the building. And generosity doesn't have to be about the building. It's about the mission that God gave us to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ on this side of the Jordan. So what you've got to understand is that if generosity is from the heart, generosity is motivated differently for different people. You have to figure out what it is that motivates people to move forward and be generous. So the question really is, what are you asking people to be generous towards? And asking people to be generous towards something doesn't mean a project. It means the mission that we're trying to accomplish. So the first thing that you have to do if you're going to start a culture of generosity in your church is very simply this. You have to have the 3 C's. 3 C's. 1, you have to be clear. 2, you have to be concise. 3, you have to be consistent. Clear. You have to know what you're asking people to do, and it has to be clear to them. You have to start with why we're doing this. What is our mission, and what are we trying to accomplish, and why should you be a part of it? People respond when you ask them, when you make it clear for them that they matter, their input matters, and their help matters. You have to be clear that everybody has a part to play, clear that everybody is valued, clear that it's not about how much you give, but that you give. We have to be very clear about these things, and then clear about the results of their giving. Oftentimes, we take for granted that people understand where money goes in the church. But you have to understand, churches are like government buildings. We expect the lights to be on. We expect them to be warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and nobody knows how it happens. That's just the expectation. Clarity allows you to say, we want to change the world, and your giving helps us meet the needs of people inside our church and outside of our church. But here's the thing. You need to actually be doing that if you're going to say that you are. Because the thing that gets to people's hearts to create a culture of generosity are stories. When you can tell stories about how your giving and your generosity is impacting our church, people, and our community, it connects with people to say, I want to be a part of that. So it has to be clear, has to be concise. Rambling never works. If you're just kind of rambling along, it really makes people think that you don't know what you're talking about and you don't really have an idea of where you're trying to go, which means that you have to have a clear picture so that in 30 seconds, you can explain the what, the why, and the how somebody can be a part of it. That's about being concise. That's about knowing your story, knowing what you're trying to do, and being able to tell it to people. If we're honest, in the church, sometimes we think it's rude to talk about money. It's not rude to talk about money. It's rude to talk about money poorly. You have to be able to talk about money well so that people can see the connection to their faith and their money. So it's like bringing two things together as opposed to having them standing at polar opposites. But you have to be clear, you have to be concise, and last but not least, you have to be consistent. You have to be talking about this on the regular basis. I'm not sure how November became Stewardship Month across the connection, but somehow, some way, we all decided that's when we'll do pledges, that's when we'll get the budget together, and that's the one time of the year that it's okay to talk about money. It's okay to talk about generosity and money year round. As a matter of fact, you have to. And I'm going to prove it to you. Have you ever been watching TV and you heard this? 1877 cars for kids. KARS cars for kids. 1877 cars for kids. Donate your car today. Yes, all of you have. All of you are sick of the jingle, but all of you know the jingle because you've heard it over and over and over again. Let me tell you this. Even though you may be sick of the jingle, there's somebody who's hearing it for the first time. There's somebody who's hearing it for the second time. There's somebody who's just hearing it. And when I say hearing, it's just been playing in the background of their mind, but now it's moved into the forefront of their mind. You have to remember, when you're consistent, you're essentially broadcasting your message over and over again until it sinks in and becomes a part of people's cognitive mindset and drifts into their heart. So you want to over and over again state your case clearly and concisely so that it begins to seep into people and it becomes a part of the culture. Now, let's be clear. There are good ways to do this and bad ways to do this. A bad way to do this is to beat people over the head. A good way to do this is to simply continually explain our mission, our vision, and what we're accomplishing by what we're doing. So that's creating the culture. But now here's the problem. Once you've created a culture, the question is, how do you make that culture live and go forward in a digital age? And the problem is, we've been passing the plate for so long that we've all thought it would be nice to do some of these other things. Now they're not nice, they're a necessity. So when we talk about them being a necessity, the question is, how do you get people to give when they're not sitting in a building? When there's not the peer pressure of the plate going by, when people are being pulled out of their habits and have to establish new habits. And here's the thing, we have to just do it. I'll explain it to you. I was in DC a couple weeks ago. Wow, time really flies. Make that a couple months ago. Ugh. Anyway, I went to go park my car. And for once, I actually had change for the meter. What did I find out? No more meters. You now have pay stations so that you can drop your card, get your slip, put it back in your car. Now, here's the interesting thing. I don't remember the survey about going from meters to pay stations. It was just a decision that was made that we all had to live into. Often in the church, we are afraid to move forward because we're afraid of what people will say, think, and how they will react. I'll let you in on a secret. People will live into what you ask them to live into. Now, it will not always be easy. It will not always be quick, but this is why you go back. You have to be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, concise about what you're doing and why you're doing, and consistently tell people, this is what we're doing now. If you do that, what you begin to have is a digital revolution in your church. The churches who have done the best during this crisis are the ones who had moved people to digital giving before the crisis happened, because they didn't have to get people to do something. People were continually doing what they were already doing. So what we want to do is move people into the digital age. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes we will say, well, we can't get our people to do that. Let me let you in on a secret. Your people are doing things digitally everywhere else. The church cannot be the one place that has decided to buck the culture and be Luddites about this. Everywhere else, people have moved online. People are doing things digitally. We just have to give people the opportunity and move them towards it, because if we don't, when the collection plate disappears, so do we. So I want to give you some tools. Some very specific things to be doing right now that will get your digital collection plate together. Number one, you have to offer online giving. And when I say online giving, I mean something very specific with online giving right now. You need a way for people to give on your church website, which means you need a church website. Doesn't have to be a great church website. It doesn't have to be a fancy church website, but there has to be a way that people can go on the internet, reach your church, and give to it. Now, there are a million ways to do it. You can embed all sorts of things onto your website, and websites don't have to be expensive. You can get a website through, slipped my mind. There it is, WordPress. You can get a website through WordPress. WordPress will give you a website virtually for free. And for $20 a year, they will give you your own URL, www, First United Methodist Church of wherever. And on there, you can embed a picture of your church and a link that says give here. And that solves your church giving issue from a website perspective. You've got to be able to have people have a way to give online to your church. Second thing that you want to do, you want to make sure that you can use the app world. How many of you are watching this on a phone or have your phone nearby or a tablet or something like that? Look at Bill. Bill's holding up his iPhone right now. People live by their phones. And if people live by their phones, you've got to give people a way to give on their phones. Because when you're giving people a way to give on their phones, what you're able to do is contact them directly on something that they already have, which means that you either need a church app or you need to be able to get on one of the app giving platforms that allows your church to be a part of a broader app. Now, I know some of you are saying, but Dr. Williams, when you do that, they take a percentage to process the giving. Well, if somebody's going to give you $100 and the giving and the percentage is 3%, that means that they take $3, you get 97. If the choice is you get 97 or you get nothing, you pick. It's really that simple. Yes, there are fees associated with these things. There are fees associated with everything. But here's the thing. If you create the right culture of generosity, you can ask people to give a little bit more to cover the fees. And people do that all the time. But the point is, giving has to be easily accessible in the digital world, because when giving is easily accessible, it's more likely to be done.
I want to give you a quick example if I can, Daryl.
Shoot.
I visit a lot of churches with my position with the annual conference, and I had forgotten my checkbook. For those who don't know what that is, it's a little book with paper in it. I can write play money on it. And I went to the church's website. They had a giving link on it. And when I went to give, they even asked me, would you like to give a little extra to offset the cost? And I did. And so it literally cost the church nothing. And it was very easy for me to give. So I want to just affirm what you're saying. Highly recommend having online giving of some sort or an app for those who either forgot or don't even have a checkbook.
Yeah, absolutely. Third thing, you want to talk to your people about giving through their bank. You can set up your church the same way that people set up automated bill pays, where through your bank without a cost, you can call your bank and say, I want to give X amount to my church once a week, twice a month, once a month, whatever frequency you want. And the bank will literally mail a check to your church. Now, if your church has direct deposit versus that bank, they can sometimes do a direct deposit. Now, that's a bank by bank thing, but all banks will mail a check on your behalf. So if you have people who say, listen, I'm not going to do all of that, what else can I do? You can have them call their banks, and their banks will set up a reoccurring draft from their checking account for them that the bank will automatically mail to the church. The great thing about some of these digital tools is very simple. They automate giving. What you want is people to become consistent givers without there being any friction in their giving. By friction, what I mean is if it's automatic and I don't have to think about it, then it will happen, and it's something that I've pledged to make happen. So what you have to think through is, how do people become automated givers? I'll show you. If you've ever seen an ASPCA commercial, they find the saddest, cryingest puppies and cats, and they put them on TV, and then they say what? For $16 a month, you can save Fluffy. Now, here's the thing. Fluffy is a part of the Actors Guild. Fluffy is doing just fine. But for years, they've been doing these, and people will pledge $16 a month, which means every month until you tell them to stop, you will give a donation to the ASPCA of $16. You want your church to be a place that people give to every week, every month, without having to think about it. So what you're really trying to set up is what's called reoccurring giving. When you set up reoccurring giving, you give people the ability to say, if I'm on vacation, I give anyway. If I'm out of town, I give anyway. If I can't make it to church this week, I give anyway. And more importantly, if I'm in the house under a restriction, I give anyway. And when people have decided that they're going to be generous and that people have decided they're going to be a part of this, people are not offended when you make things easy for them. People are offended when you make things more difficult for them. I've never seen anybody get mad about the express line, but I've seen people get over the bend about a line that was stretching back through the store. Anytime you can make it easier, people are far more likely to give and be helpful. They want to do it. They want to do it automated, and you have to give them the ability to do that. So just a review. You want to be clear, you want to be concise, you want to be consistent, but you want to take away friction. And taking away friction means making it easy for people to be contributors, making it easy for people to be able to give to you without there being work involved for them. If you do that, this is what I can tell you. You can raise more money and do more ministry with less work. You can raise more money and do more ministry with less work. Because here's the thing. What we've talked about so far are for the people who consistently go to your church. When you start doing digital giving, you can start leveraging other platforms to get people to invest in your ministry. You can start doing online campaigns through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you've got a web page where you can direct people, you can say, we are going to give out 200 backpacks in Cockeysville this year. We need your help to do it. You never know who might see that link, click, and give $50 to the cause. That doesn't make them a part of your church, but that makes them a supporter of your ministry. And when we talk about supporting the ministry, which is ultimately what generosity and funding is, it's so that we can help the church, but help the church help other people. So you've got to be clear, you've got to be concise, you've got to be consistent, you've got to give people the appropriate tools, and then you can branch out into the digital space and make it easy for people to support you even when they can't come to the building. All right, Bill, I'm going to have a sip of tea and I'll take questions.
Well, I've got a couple. We've got some that come in, some that I've thought of. You talked a lot in the beginning, Daryl, about this culture of generosity. Mm-hmm. How does a church go about discovering what their culture is?
Well, easiest way for a church to discover what their culture is to ask, essentially. Ask people what they care about. Okay. And when you ask people what they care about, you will find out what the culture of the church is. When you're talking about the culture, you're talking about the culture around giving right now. So when you ask people what they care about, some people care desperately about the building. Some people care desperately about the cemetery. Some people care desperately about the youth program. Some people care desperately about their choir. You have to ask what people care about to understand what pricks their heart. But when you ask them what they care about, you got to know what they care about in the ministry, but you also have to know what they care about in the world. When you ask people what they care about in the world, they will begin to talk about things that you may not do at your church, which gives you a ministry opportunity. What we've got to remember is that people are outside of our churches for 167 hours a week in normal times. In normal times, you got 168 hours in a week, hour-long service. Well, 167 hours, people are doing other things. So some people are passionate about youth sports. Some people are passionate about parks and recreation. There are all sorts of ministries that we can be involved in as the church if we know where people's hearts are. So creating a culture of generosity means, one, you've got to find out what where people's hearts are and what they care about. But two, you have to make generosity a thing. If you don't make it a thing, then it's never going to be a thing. You want to talk about being generous. And oftentimes we will say, well, I don't want to offend people, it can be uncomfortable. We're not talking about offending people, and we're not talking about things being uncomfortable. There is nothing wrong with being generous. The story of the Good Samaritan is a story not only about loving your neighbor, but a story about generosity. Remember, the Good Samaritan, he found somebody of a different culture, took them to a hotel, paid for the night, and then said, take care of them, and anything over what I've already given you, I will pay for when I get back. That is not just a tale of taking care of your neighbor, but that's a tale of generosity, because plenty of people would have said, look, I just can't afford that. The Good Samaritan said, I will find a way to afford it. Remember, John Wesley said, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And when you earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can, it gives you a heart of generosity, because saving and giving allow your generosity to be generous towards yourself, but also generous towards others.
Excellent. Here are some questions that came in. So you're talking about a lot about the digital giving. So somebody has asked, with all the digital giving, does that mean we should discontinue using offering envelopes?
No, you should not discontinue using offering envelopes. What you want to do is start moving people away from offering envelopes, but you should not discontinue them, because there are some people who are simply not going to move into the digital realm. That's just not going to happen for them. Both of my parents wrote checks weekly to their church until they passed away. They took pride in it. On Saturday nights, they filled out their offering envelopes. They wrote their checks. They put it in. They put a little sticker on the front with their name and address, because they didn't want to fill it into the little lines, because they're like, that's just too small. I'll just put a sticker on the front. And they did that every week until they passed. And there are some people that culturally are not going to shift towards that. But what you're trying to get is people to shift towards that who will. And that's about really the future of your church, because the people who are typically going to write checks are going to be older people. The people who don't know what a check is are typically younger people. So what you have to ask yourself is, if we want to get younger people into our church, do we want them to support our church? Because if you want them to support your church, then you've got to give them the tools that they use to do that. So no, you don't want to get rid of your offering envelopes. You just want to start making your offering envelopes less and less of a percentage of what you're counting.
So what I hear you saying is you want to add opportunities for giving without taking away opportunities for giving.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Next question that's come in. I don't know if we can answer it. Maybe we can try. With the new health guidelines, what kind of equipment should we have in our finance offices, and what should we keep on hand for counters?
Okay. A few things that you should have in your finance office, and you need, especially right now, because we don't know so much. There are a few things you want to do. One, you want to think about how large your finance and counting team is and the space that they're working in. Before you start looking at equipment, sometimes in churches, the finance room is a 6x9 cell that we've got 13 people in. You can't do that anymore. So you've got to figure out what's a spatial relationship that gives people room. In times like these, I would say you want to have face mask, you want to have gloves, you want to have hand sanitizer, and you want to be wearing gloves from the time you come into the room until the time that you leave. And once you leave, you want to sanitize your hands and then go wash them with soap and water. So you want to have all of those things available from the very beginning. So face mask, gloves, hand sanitizer, so that as you're touching equipment, you're never touching them with your bare hands. If you want to add Clorox wipes and some sort of disinfectant spray to spray off or wipe off the calculator and cutting utensils and those sorts of things so that you don't leave remnants behind of past germs, you would want to do that as well. But it's really about making it as sanitary as you can.
Right. And so, I mean, to put it in practical terms, while we may not be passing a plate when we resume in-person worship, we'll probably have some kind of a container for people to drop their offering in. So you'll want, to be able to have gloves and whatnot to take that out. And someone did ask about if the room doesn't allow. I guess what I hear you saying is then switch rooms if you're able in your church, so that you have room in there.
When we talk about culture again are the habitual things that we do. This is going to necessitate a rethinking of things. Your finance room may not be the appropriate finance room after this. So when we start moving back into our churches, you may want to consider how and when you count. Because if all you've got is one small space, you're either going to have fewer counters, and you have to have a certain amount of counters just to have good accounting rules and practices. So if you're going to have a certain amount of people, you may have to count in a different location. And that may mean that you count after everybody has left the church and you move all the pieces you need into the sanctuary so that you have enough space to work with. But really, we have to be creative. You have to remember that right now we have to reimagine everything. We don't have the ability to say when things get back to normal. There's not going to be a back to normal. There's going to be a new normal. And that new normal is going to make us use different equipment, use different spaces, and do different things. You have to remember right now, nothing is off the board. You have to reimagine how to make this work from a blank slate instead of trying to fit new things into an old pattern.
I know Reverend Smothers likes to use the term, instead of new normal, he likes to call it the new now. So what's our new now going to look like? Now somebody asked, and I'm going to try to answer. Somebody asked about which virtual giving platforms do we recommend. The one thing I want to offer is, I know our conference finance team, Daryl, has been doing consultations for online giving. So I'm going to answer this person's question. Everyone will be able to see the answer with a link that I've just dropped into the Q&A answer section. And that link will take you to a scheduling app where you can schedule a one-on-one consultation with someone from our finance team. And they will go over what some of the recommended giving platforms are. And we had been offering some help with getting churches onto the conferences giving platform, sharing that with them. So you might want to follow that link and get some more options. We do have an answer. Should we let the money sit for a couple of days before we count it because of COVID-19? Do you have any words about that?
We know so little, and the advice that we get one day can be contradicted weeks later. You can let the money sit, but then you've got to ask the security questions around that. That's why I recommend the gloves, because if you're wearing gloves and you're never touching the money, then you alleviate the questions about what could possibly be on the money. But the difficulty with saying we're going to let the money sit for a couple days is then you have to schedule people to come in and count it in an off time. And the problem with scheduling people to come in and count at an off time is you're getting people to schedule. You've got to get the money to the bank. There are a whole bunch of things that go into that. So you can do it, but a way to alleviate that is to simply use gloves.
Excellent, thank you. Speaking of security, what advice do you have for words or phrases to help reassure people in the congregation that digital giving is secure?
You have to say digital giving is secure.
Could you repeat that, please?
You simply say it is a safe and secure way to give. When you pick a digital giving option, you want to pick digital giving options that stress their own security, because what most digital giving providers will tell you is what levels of security they use. And most of them use the same levels of security that the banks use, that your utility companies use. You know, digital giving is new to the church, but digital payment is not new anywhere else. We're simply using the same technology that's used to pay your Pepco bill, that's used to pay your mortgage if you don't mail your mortgage check in, all these other things that we do digitally. All of those same procedures, practices, and security measures are in place for digital giving at the church. What people often think of is that the church is kind of doing this on their own. And what you really want to do is let people know this is the company that we're using or that we've contracted with to do our digital giving. Because what the concern that people have is, I'm not sure if Joe knows exactly how to make this secure on our church website, Joe being the finance chair. What you're telling people is we're contracting with this company to do this. This company has a history they use, and we know that they are a safe, secure company with a background. When you do that, people sort of say, okay, so the church is using X or the church is using Y, not the church is doing this themselves. Because unless you've just got a whole bunch of computer folk in your church, I couldn't tell you how to do it. I know how to pick a good company that does it, but I couldn't do it myself.
I think you make a really good point. Do your research on the company.
Yeah.
And then you can assure people that the company is secure and even let them check it out for themselves.
Absolutely.
So how do you suggest sharing with the congregation this move to digital giving? I mean, do you do in-person meetings, flyers, newsletter? How do you let them know? How do you let people know that you're offering this new option?
Well, you can't do in-person meetings right now, so that one's kind of off the table. So the question is, how do you communicate? This is when we go back to culture. How do you communicate in your church? What's the culture of communication? Now, we've taken one thing off the table because plenty of churches say we'll just have a meeting after church. We can't do that now. So how would you communicate this? On every platform that you can to reach as many people as you can. If your church does a weekly worship broadcast, you want to mention it on your broadcast. If you do a digital newsletter, you want to put it in your digital newsletter. If you do a conference call or a prayer call, you want to mention it appropriately on the prayer call or conference call. You know, just one of those, everybody, before we get started today, I want to let you know this is something new that we're offering at the church. If you have any questions, always have somebody that people can call for questions. They may or may not call, but they want to know that they can get a question answered. So in every platform that you communicate with people, remember, we talked about it needs to be clear, concise, consistent. You want to have a clear message about what you're doing that's concise and easy to understand and consistently communicated across all of your platforms all of the time.
And I'll tell you, when there was in-person worship, I was doing a visit at another church, and it was time for the offering, and they put a slide on their screen that if you wanted to write a check, who to make the check out to. If you wanted to give through their website, you could text to give. They even had QR codes on the ends of the pews that I could have scanned, which would have taken me directly to their giving platform. And they explained it all so that there was no questions left open. And that was just very helpful for someone. This was our first time visiting the church to know how we could give.
Now, let me say this, because I know that can sound scary, sort of a what do you say? I'm going to give you an example.
Please do.
Just going to walk you through an offering appeal. It's offering time here at First United Methodist Church. We thank you for your generosity. Here at First Church, there are several ways that you can give. You can give if you're here in person by writing out a check and placing it in an envelope and putting it in the collection plate. If you're with us digitally or virtually, you can give online at our church website, www.firstchurchalexandria.org, and press the give key. You can also give through our app. by going into the App Store or the Google Play Store and searching for the First Church app. Once you download that app, if you press the Give key, you will also be directed into how to give there. You can also give to the church by simply mailing your tithes and offerings to the church. All you've got to do is fill out your envelope, place it in an envelope, and mail that envelope to First Church Alexandria, 123 Sesame Street, Alexandria, Wisconsin, 38057. Yes, I said 123 Sesame Street. All I could come up with, I have a 3-year-old, I'm sorry. But my point is, that's 90 seconds, and you've given people 4 or 5 different ways to give. And you want to just be able to do that consistently over and over again, and people will choose which one works for them.
I also found it very helpful when I was serving in the local church is to lift up a story of how the congregation's generosity made a difference that week and tied it to a very concrete example. So they knew right away, oh, I gave last week and this is what we did this week with it.
Absolutely.
So we're going to open this up to all of our participants on the broadcast today. We've gotten through their questions so far. So if you have a question, I'll put Reverend Williams on the spot. Any question about giving, go to the Q&A feature on the Zoom broadcast and type in your question, and I will share it with Reverend Williams, and he will answer it.
And while you guys are doing that, I'll go a little bit further in some of the things that you can do once you've gone virtual that are a little bit outside of the norm of our in-person on Sunday giving. Once you have a QR code, an app, or a website that people can give to, you can begin to use other platforms to give. You can start a drive, for instance, on Facebook. You can sort of say, listen, church, we need to raise $1,000 by next week for pick a cause. And you can say, listen, if you'll join us on what we're calling Giving Tuesday, people do Giving Tuesdays all the time, and just on your Facebook page, place a link to your church website into the give section and say, listen, we're asking everybody who can to give generously and share this post with friends. And we're going to, on Giving Tuesday, try to raise $1,000 to feed hungry kids in our city. You'd be amazed at how many people may give $10, $15, $20, and suddenly outside of your norm of giving, you've now got $1,000 to do this ministry that's needed but wasn't necessarily budgeted for. And it gives you a story you can tell about how we're being generous to the community. Every dollar that you give is going to go to providing meals for children in our city. Just the types of things that you can do when you can get people right where they are. It's a spur of the moment thing. What you want to do, all of us have been in a supermarket and we've had everything in our carts, but we got to the cashier and something on Star Magazine got our attention, or all of a sudden you just really wanted a Hershey bar. It was an impulse purchase. You didn't think twice about it. It's the same thing with these types of giving campaigns. You can get people to kind of give on impulse because you've created, remember, a culture of generosity where people say, I give because I'm generous. So we're asking for this. I want to help kids in the area. I'll give $10 to it. You'd be amazed how many people will do that both inside and outside of your congregation.
Thank you. Somebody did ask, and I will remind people, yes, we are recording tonight's broadcast, and it will be available sometime this week on the conference website. If you go to bwcumc.org and under the events, go to Training Tuesday. We have all of our past broadcasts that are available. So do you have any thoughts about using Zelle for giving?
Yes.
Yes, that's your thought, or yes, you have thoughts. How about that?
I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
I know, that's all right.
You know, Zelle, like anything else, if you can get Zelle to give to your church, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What we want to give people are all the options available from their normal life to give to the church. For instance, since you brought up Zelle, we'll walk through all of them. Zelle, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, you walk down the line, you can set up an account for your church on any of those platforms and people can give directly to them. Remember, what we're trying to do is remove friction. You want to give people the ability to do things that they're used to benefit your church. Now, This is what you want to make sure when you're doing that. Because these are charitable donations and tax deductible, you have to make sure that you are tracking them appropriately so that people can get credit at the end of the year for their donations. But absolutely use all of the platforms. You can Cash App, Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, all of them. Your church should have an account. I'll put it this way. If Warren Buffett walked up to you on the street and said, hey, I want to give your church $3 million. Can I PayPal it to you? You'd really want to have PayPal at that moment, wouldn't you? So what if it's not 3 million? What if it's 300? What if it's 30? What if it's 10? When somebody wants to be generous, we want to have the tools in place to allow them to do it.
Excellent. We have a testimony. I'll even give a shout out to Pastor Nona Colbert. She's got a testimony for us tonight. She writes, this is not a question, but a testimony. That's how I knew it was a testimony. So thank you, Pastor Colbert, that we established online giving once the quarantine went into place. As a small and high number older member church, they were not comfortable with technology. I was concerned that they might be resistant to this method of giving. However, I was pleasantly surprised that they have all taken to it very well. So I would say, based on that testimony, don't let your fear of what you think might happen to discourage you from at least trying. I'm going to throw a poll up real quick for our participants. I'm just curious, since we've halted in-person worship, how has your giving been in your local church? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Has it stayed the same? Take a moment and answer that for us tonight. Give people a few more moments. I always, we ask these questions periodically through the webinar. I just feel like maybe we need the Jeopardy theme. You did so well on the Cars for Cash theme. Maybe we'll hire you. All righty. That has helped. Let's end that poll. And wow. You can't see the answers yet, so I'll share them. We have some people on the phone. So since we've halted in-person worship, 37% of those who voted told us that their offering has gone up. 29% said it's gone down, and 35% said it has stayed the same. So either it's gone up or stayed the same as the vast majority of congregations who are participating in tonight's call. And we have about 70 people on the call today. So that's a really good, a good snapshot. So I really hope that that is good across the conference. So another question that has come in. So every week on the church service Zoom call, there's a presentation under the offering part of the service for digital online. It's listed as an option and it's presented to congregants. However, every week when I call church members, they still drop their checks, envelopes off at church or mail them. So how can you apply the 3 C's to encourage digital giving?
Okay. It's going to be an awkward conversation. But what you want to simply say when you talk to people is, have you considered giving digitally? And find out what the resistance point is. Some people will say, well, I've just never thought about it. Other people will say, I just don't do that. Some people will say, I would, but I don't know how. Those are the people that you really want to just be able to say, listen, I'll help you and walk you through it. Because there are plenty of people who would do it if we were able to, if they could get over the technological jump. The one issue that you're going to run into sometimes that you want to be aware of is depending on the age of your congregation. Some people just simply don't have the tools to do digital giving. And we don't want those people to feel left out or inferior. Because if you just don't have a computer or you don't have a smartphone or you don't have the internet in your house or you don't have a secure connection in your house, you may not want to do digital giving, and that's completely fine. But if you ask people, that's how you find out where the hesitancy is. And that hesitancy for one person is probably the hesitancy for a few people. So it means that you change your slide from, we'll be doing a course on digital giving on this day at this time. Tune in if you'd like to learn how.
Excellent. Well, somebody has requested we ask another poll question. And they
Fire
like
away.
to find out from people who are participating in tonight's call. We talked about, has your overall giving increased, stayed the same, or gone down? They want to know about online giving. So since we halted in-person worship, my online giving has. So the number of people using online giving, has that more people using it, less people are using it, or the same number of people are using it? So please take a moment and answer that question for us. We're very responsive on tonight's webinar. I'd like to see at least 50% of our participants answer this question. We're at 49%. So if we can get a few more people to answer, has online giving increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Well, now we're getting a lot of requests for more poll questions. That's interesting. I'll let you answer another question. We'll throw another poll question up here in a moment. We're going to end that poll and share the results. So 81% of those who voted, we had about 56% of the participants vote on this. 81% has seen an increase in online giving. I think the good news is, or maybe I should ask you this, Daryl, in your experience, once people start giving online, do you see them switching back to analog giving?
No, because we are creatures of habit. I can tell you, when I went to my appointment at St. Paul, I wrote one check to St. Paul my first Sunday. That Monday or Tuesday, I set up digital giving and have not thought about it since. And that's how most people work. It's a habit. You will find that once people start giving digitally, they don't go back simply because they don't have to. It's easier. It's like all things. Once you've kind of made the leap is the hard part. Once people make the leap, they sort of say, I should have been doing this the whole time.
Okay. Somebody asked, should we continue to use pledge cards?
Ooh, okay. Now, here's the problem with pledge cards from my learned perspective. When we use pledge cards, we will often use them as an excuse to only talk about giving and generosity on Pledge Sunday. And that is dangerous, because what you've said is, write this down, we sort of do a set it and forget it. I wrote the pledge card. That's what I expect. That's what I expect to do. That's what you expect me to do. We'll all find out in a year. That is dangerous. That is very dangerous. You can use pledge cards, but you have to use them as a part of the toolbox. You have to use them in conjunction with having talks about generosity and preaching on generosity and all sorts of things to create generosity in the hearts and minds of people. What you want to do is, once people give a pledge, you don't want that to be the end of the discussion. You want to have people give a pledge, but then you also want to steward that pledge afterwards. You want to be in consistent, if not constant, communication with people around their pledges. Because when you remind people, you don't wind up with the Christmas catch-up. Because what we often do is people say, oh, I pledged X, I'm at Y, that's why we have big Christmas Eve services, so people can do the Christmas Eve catch-up. If we consistently talk to people around their pledges and around generosity throughout the year, we don't have that big catch-up at the end. And for most churches, if we're honest, one of the biggest issues that we deal with is cash flow. It's not cash amount, it's when it comes in and how it comes in, because we'll get it in lumps at different times of the year. Plenty of people right now are dreading the summer slump. I mean, let's be honest. Most churches have the summer slump. You know, churches that don't have summer slumps, the ones with digital giving. Because if people have set up digital automated giving, there is no slump because it's going to happen automatically. So Can you still use pledge cards? Absolutely. Should you? Yes, but they're a part of a bigger thing as opposed to the one bullet in the gun.
And you mentioned something that I want to highlight, Daryl, as it relates to pledge cards. You've shared with us and encouraged us to help people set up recurring giving. Isn't that as good as making a pledge?
Absolutely.
I would say it might even be better because you know the money's coming in.
Actually, it is better than making a pledge, because if you use now we're on to something. If you use pledge cards to set up reoccurring giving, you have gone from a pledge to a commitment, because once you set up reoccurring giving, the money has been designated to move. A pledge, you guys have heard me say you want to take out friction. A pledge card gives you a hope, but now there's got to be execution behind it. If somebody uses a pledge card to set up reoccurring giving, that's going to come, and there's nothing that they have to do to make it come. So you can use that as your pledge cards, or during your pledging, you can say, now that you've made this pledge, would you like help with setting up reoccurring giving to fulfill your pledge?
I know some churches, I'll just throw it in, use a company called Venco, and you can fill out a card with the church finance office, and they usually will then set it up for you. And then it just keeps coming into the church until you tell it to stop. Someone has another question. So we're going to try something a little bit different than a poll this time. We'll get a little crazy on a Tuesday night. Somebody says, I'm curious about this. How many people are getting checks, contributions from people they've never heard of before? And they ask this because their church is receiving donations and checks and contributions from people they've never heard it from. So what I'm going to do is, if our audience will go down to the chat window, and if you open the chat window, I'm going to open the chat for a moment so that Reverend Williams and I can see it. If your church has received contribution, go to the chat and type yes. If you had contributions before, go to the chat and type no. The chat window is now active, so go ahead and type in there. Have you received contributions from people you've never heard of? And we're getting some of those responses in, not as quickly as the polls, but we got a couple of people, some yes, a number of yes, a couple of no's. Some people don't know because that's not their area. Oh, my favorite answer, yes, thank God. Someone's not sure, that's okay. Excellent. So,
okay, I have a question for the people who have said yes, just out of curiosity. Are you all doing online broadcasting? If you said yes, are you doing online broadcasting?
So if you said yes to that last question, I'll leave the chat window open. Just answer again. Are you doing some kind of online Zoom, Facebook? And people are saying yes. That's why they think they're getting the giving from people they haven't heard of.
Well, no. The reason I ask is because that's absolutely why you are. When we restrict ourselves to people who have to come into our building, then we are restricting ourselves, then we are taking away their ability to contribute to what we're doing. When you do Facebook, YouTube, anything that can be accessed by a broader community, you get the opportunity to introduce yourself and what you're doing to a community that may never set foot into your church, but may very well want to support what you're doing. So I say that just as a plug for continuing to do online ministry even after we can go back into our buildings.
You took the words right out of my mouth, sir, that I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how to return to in-person worship, but please don't stop using your online presence. From those who said yes, you see that it's benefiting you by receiving contributions from people who would never come to your building. We did have a question. You mentioned a number of online giving platforms like Zelle, Google Pay, the Apple Store, PayPal. They all have fees for their use. So how do you decide how many, if any, of these platforms you offer to members?
I err on the side of offering all of them to members, because you want members to use what they use. Trying to get people, Coke people drink Coke. Pepsi people drink Pepsi. Mountain Dew people drink Mountain Dew. If you tell people, we want you to do this, but you can only drink Shasta to do it, you have now told them, we want to make this as hard as humanly possible. Here's the thing. Yes, they are all going to take fees, but they're not all taking fees at the same time. They're just the platform that you use is going to have you pay for the service of using their platform. So it's not like they're going to be multiple fees. It's just the fee for whichever group you're using. Now, this is what I do want to say. Make sure when you set these up that you check and see if they have a nonprofit discount. Many of these platforms give different fee structures to churches and nonprofits. So make sure that if there is a discount on fees available, that you are getting it from your provider.
And I think another thing that's safe to say is, most of these are doing a per transaction fee. So you want to make sure, is it a per transaction fee or is it a reoccurring monthly fee, whether anybody uses it or not?
Yeah.
And if people aren't going to use it, you may not want to pay a monthly fee. Do you know if there's a fee for Cash App?
I don't think there is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. If only there was some device that had some kind of a search engine that we could look into and ask if there was a fee for Cash App. We've gotten through all of our questions so far, Daryl, so I will put it back on our participants. If you have a question about stewardship, generosity, digital giving, please go to the Q&A feature and ask your questions.
Okay, because I have one, hold on one second, because I have one of those machines, Cash App does not charge a fee to send, request, or receive personal payments from a debit card or bank account or for a standard deposit. It charges the sender a 3% fee to send a payment using a credit card and a 1.5% fee for an instant deposit to a bank account.
And that's what, we have some of the smartest audience members on our training Tuesday. Someone said there is a fee if you want an immediate deposit. So some people use, they like to use their own checking account. As you mentioned, you can set up your checking account to automatically send a check to the church every month or to transfer, and there's no fees to the church or to the giver if you use your own personal checking account to auto debit. Any other questions, my friends? As we are moving through our evening, we have some time if you have questions. We're also not above ending early if you don't have any questions. But stewardship, generosity, or digital giving, I know Reverend Williams has given us a lot to think about tonight. Any other words of wisdom as we wait for some questions or as we wind down this evening, sir?
Sure. It's important that you know that, number one, we are going to make it through this. There will be an after. But what your after will look like will depend on what you do in the here and now. And I say that not to be scary. I say that because I want us to be inspired and proactive. I want us to proactively right now do the things that we said we wish we had time to do. Because what you have now is a different type of time. I'm not going to say more time, because God knows with a 3-year-old, I feel like I have less time now and I'm working harder now than I was before. But you have time to do different things. And the different things that you will do now will set up the course of your church for the future. So I want to go back to the C's again. You want to be clear, concise, and consistent. And right now is a great time to start in your messaging, being clear, concise, and consistent about wanting to be a generous church, wanting to do more ministry, but needing people's help to do it. The one thing that we cannot be afraid to do is ask. But you have to ask empathetically. When I say ask empathetically, you have to remember that this is hard times for some people. There are people who are not getting paid, people who are not getting paid as much. Money is tight for some people, but money is not tight for everybody. You want to recognize in your asking that there are people who are struggling, and you want to empathize with them and say, listen, we understand if you have the heart to give, but not the means. But you also want to say to the people who have the means and the heart, we need your help right now. We need your help so that our church will survive this and be strong after this. So don't be afraid. Don't let this be a time that you shrink back. Let this be a time that you step forward, because people need us. Our ministries are more important now than they were before. We are more crucial and vital to our members and our communities now than we were in February. And we've got to be prepared for that mentally, spiritually, and financially.
Trying to type answer some questions. I will type them, but I'll let you say it again. Your email address again.
revdlw@gmail.com.
I am also going to post this in the Q&A answer. So if you look on your Q&A, you'll see a tab that says answered question, and both my email address and Reverend Williams' email address is in there. Okay, a couple more questions that have come in with how should we monitor our church giving? Should we look at the quarter, halfway through the year, 3/4, at the end of the year? How do we monitor that kind of giving?
Well, let's talk about monitoring in a couple ways. You should be monitoring your church giving on the weekly basis. You should know what's coming in week by week for planning purposes. Once you know what's coming in week by week, you want to monitor that monthly, and then you want to compile that quarterly. So you want to know whether you're having a good quarter or a bad quarter, but you want to know week to week what your cash flow looks like. Now, the other side of that is, how do you communicate to your members? You want to, on more than one occasion during the year, I think quarterly is best, but you pick what you want to do. Thank members for their giving and tell them what they've given so far. Now, that doesn't mean tell them what they've given versus pledge, because oftentimes we'll do that, and that kind of seems as a, hey, buddy, you're behind. That's not what we're trying to do. What we want to do is let people know we appreciate your giving, and this is what you've given so far. So when you're doing that sort of thing, what you want to do is you want to start off with a thank you. You want to then go to, we appreciate that you've given X amount. Then you want to go to, in the coming quarter, we're planning to do this. And your generosity is crucial to making these things happen. Then you end with another thank you, and that's it. But you do that quarterly, and it keeps giving and generosity and planning in front of people. Because what you want people to know is that their money is going to something. And when we say going to something, it needs to be going to more than paying the bills. Nobody cares about the church's bills other than the church treasurer, finance chair, and pastor. Everybody else thinks of it like a government building. Warm in the winter, cool in the summer, lights on. And truth of the matter is, people are saying, I got my own bills. I don't have time to look at somebody else's bills, which means that what people want to know is ministry. The building, the church van, all those things are tools to make ministry happen. But to have tools, you need to have finances. So you want to remind people of what we're doing, and that folds into the things that we're doing it with. And I would always say quarterly.
How often should we be thanking our givers?
As often as you can.
Okay.
Well, when I say as often as you can, there are different ways to thank people. At the St. Paul Church, when we do the offering appeal, we sometimes do the offering appeal as a thank you. And I'll show you what that looks like. Last month we were able to give out 100 book bags to children in the community because of the faithful giving of the people of the St. Paul Church. On behalf of the community, people whose faces you will never see, people whose stories you will never know, these are lives that we have touched as our church. And I thank you because your generous giving made that possible. Now, as we prepare to give today, I want you to know that we give because God has called us to be a blessing to other people. So as you prepare to give, know that here at the St. Paul Church, you can give multiple ways. You can give on our website at www.stpaulaxonhill.org by pressing the Give tab. You can also go to the Givelify app and search for St. Paul Church in Oxon Hill. On the Givelify app, you can give in 3 easy steps by using your phone and your credit card. And last but certainly not least, you can always, if you're here in person, write a check and put it in the offering plate, or you can mail your check to the church at 6634 St. Barnabas Road, Oxon Hill, Maryland, 20745. God bless you because you've come, and God bless you because you're going to give.
Do you still take cash?
Absolutely.
Just checking. Now, somebody did have a technical question because I mentioned the QR code. Who provides you with that QR code? I found there are just simple websites and apps that will translate a web address into a QR code for you, and you just print it up at your local setting. Do you have any other ways that people do that?
That's typically how it works. There are apps that'll do it for you, companies that'll do it for you. And if you decide to use a company for your online giving or processing, many of them will offer QR codes that are specific to your church as part of their package.
Someone also asked about how do we find the recordings for Training Tuesdays after the webinar is over. So if you go to the Q&A and look under the Answer tab, my friends, I have placed the web address and some instructions for how to find the webinars afterwards. As we wrap up, I just want to give a little commercial, little plug for our last 2 Training Tuesdays. We have 2 more Training Tuesdays this month, and then we're going to take a little break until the fall. Next Tuesday on June 16th, we're presenting a Training Tuesday called Revisioning Ministry, and I will be joined by the Reverend Donna Claycomb-Sokol and Reverend William Cheney, and together the 3 of us are going to look at how do we re-envision the ministries we are currently doing. Specifically, how do we eliminate ministries that have lived out their life? How do we prune back? We're going to be looking at how to revision engaging our communities, and we're going to look at revisioning how to start new ministries in light of the pandemic. And then on June 23rd, we will be led by the Reverend Dr. Rodney Smothers, and he has a special guest that will be joining him, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag on that one yet. And they will be offering a presentation on leadership, not just for the 22nd century, but how do we develop and lead in a post-pandemic world and in a protesting world. And so you want to join us for June 23rd and June 16th, and information for how to register for both of those webinars are on the conference website, bwcumc.org, and look under events and look for Training Tuesday. Ooh, someone has a good question. We'll finish up with this question. Are you able to pull reports from the online giving sites?
That depends on the site that you use. That's why I said that you've got to re-envision how you do your tracking as your finance team at your church. When you use the sites that are dedicated to this type of giving, most of them will give you reports, and they will give you better reports than you could come up with yourself. They'll give them to you annually, they'll give them to you quarterly, they'll give them to you however you want them. Some providers, depending on which ones you use, will also download into various church management systems. So not only will they print reports for you, they will also download reporting into your church management software. But when you start looking at the mainstream giving, the mainstream, we'll call them money transfer systems, things like Zelle, PayPal, Cash App, they're not designed for this type of reporting. So when you are notified of a gift from one of those, you have to take discrete notes about those so that you know how to do the giving. And what you can do from an accounting standpoint is do a dummy envelope for those folk so that you can track their giving, even if they're giving through one of these non-tracking systems.
One of our audience members did post that the Shelby Next Giving platform does allow you to pull reports for giving. And you do bring up a good point that if your church is using a church management software, a database of some sort that keeps track of your members, you might want to check with them first, because they may have a preferred giving platform that they use. And sometimes they will provide you with a discount if you use their preferred provider. So check with, if you're using a church management system, check with them as well. Well, we are coming to the end of our time. We have come to all of our questions, sir. I want to give you the last word and invite you to close us in prayer.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your time. I know that sitting and watching a Zoom about church finances is not necessarily scintillating entertainment, but I hope that my waterfall kept you at least awake. Listen, we are going to move through this and move into a new normal. And that new normal, I believe, will be a healthy one. I believe it will be a prosperous one, and I believe it will be one that helps us to continue to make a difference in the world. What I can tell you about my church is that next year we will celebrate our 230th anniversary. You don't get to stay somewhere 230 years by not adapting to the times. So I want to encourage you, adapt to what's going on. We can no longer say we don't do it that way. We have to create new culture, new norms, and new possibilities. If you do that, I promise you your best days are in front of you. I promise you that you will have the funding that you need to do what God is calling you to do. But we've got to adapt, we've got to make good choices, and we've got to move now, because as we're finding, time waits for no man, and the hits keep on coming. So as we go from this place, but never from each other, I pray that God blesses you and God keeps you. I pray that God's face shine upon you. I pray that God will give you the faith and the finances for what you're trying to do. I pray that God will give you a vision that disturbs you so much that you make the necessary course corrections to reach it. I pray that God gives you strength, that God gives you hope, that God gives you encouragement, and that you never give up. I pray that God blesses you abundantly beyond what you can ask or think, so that you may do what he's calling you to do. I pray for your health, I pray for your wealth, and I pray for your well-being. In Jesus' name, amen. Bill, you're muted.
You would think after 4 million of these, I would know to look for that little microphone. So, as I was saying, if we were in person, people would be giving you a standing ovation. So I want to invite people to go to the chat window, click on the chat window, and share your appreciation with Reverend Williams for sharing with us tonight. Just type in a word of thanksgiving for him. And hopefully you can see all of them as they're coming in. We got a woo-hoo. You got a woo-hoo.
Woo-hoo, that's a lot.
That's a lot. Excellent. People are thanking you for your inspiration and for helping them. That is one thing we have tried to provide with our Training Tuesdays, a way to equip our local churches to be in ministry with their communities and around the world. So again, thank you for making this possible tonight, for spending some time with us, for taking time away from your family. I do appreciate it. I'm going to put in a belated happy birthday.
Thank you.
That was a recent birthday for you, sir. So happy birthday, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening, and God bless. Good night.
Blessings, everybody.